Hello, good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. My name's Bastani. Tonight I'm joined by the, insurpassable Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
Well, all the better for hearing that, Aaron. Thank you. That's very kind. Great to be here with you.
It's great to have you, as always. Coming up tonight, we do have some great stories tonight, by the way. Not great as in they're all good news, but really, really fascinating stories, really wide range of stories. Labour continue to lose ground to reform in opinion polls. 3 councillors have resigned amid the leaked WhatsApp scandal involving, of course, Labour MP Andrew Gwynn. And Elon Musk trades blows with Sam Altman. The oligarchs are fighting, mum. The Gaza ceasefire has held for just 3 weeks, but now it's beginning to fray. Yesterday, Hamas announced it would delay further releases of Israeli captives after it accused Israel of repeatedly violating the terms of the ceasefire. And last night, US President Donald Trump weighed in.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out. I'm speaking for myself. Israel can override it, but from myself, Saturday at 12 o'clock, and if they're not here, all hell is going to break out.
Now, that's a significant upping of the ante by the president, and it's also a suggestion that the terms of the ceasefire should be altered. Under the current deal, Hamas and other resistance groups should release a further 12 captives by day 42 of the ceasefire. That would be the first weekend of March. But now, Trump has demanded that all 12 should be released this weekend, or, in his words, all hell would break loose. Journalists asked Trump to expand on that threat.
Mr. President, when you say all hell is going to break loose, are you speaking about retaliation from
You'll find out, and they'll find out too. Hamas will find out what I mean.
Mr. President,
they're going to find out what I mean. These are sick people, and they'll find out what I mean Saturday at 12 o'clock.
They'll find out. Presumably he means some sort of military intervention. But I suppose you have to ask the question, given what's happened to Gaza already, what difference would it make? It would have to be something rather significant for Trump to be speaking in those terms. Now, the way that Western politicians and media are framing the breakdown in the ceasefire is primarily or all in terms of Hamas, the Palestinian side. What's not being reported, however, is why, according to Hamas, the ceasefire has already broken down. In a statement released last night, Hamas detailed some of the ways they say Israel has breached the deal's terms. Under the humanitarian protocol in the ceasefire deal, Israel should have allowed 60,000 tents and 200,000 caravans into the devastated enclave. 50 trucks of fuel should also have entered Gaza, as well as reconstruction materials and much-needed heavy equipment. But Israel has reportedly only allowed 15 fuel trucks in and almost no housing units or reconstruction materials. Of course, those are desperately needed for Gaza to get back on its feet. Hamas also accused Israel of continuing to kill Palestinians in Gaza despite the ceasefire, with 11 Palestinians reportedly killed in the last 24 hours alone. But also playing in the background to Hamas's pause is Trump's plan, announced last week, to take over the Gaza Strip, forcibly displace its population, and turn it into, bizarrely, a lucrative real estate development. Under the terms of the current ceasefire, the third phase involves the reconstruction of Gaza under the supervision of Qatar, Egypt, and the UN. And the US is named as one of the guarantors of the deal, meaning they're responsible for ensuring both sides hold up to their end of the bargain. But if Trump is now promoting a different plan for Gaza, a plan that involves emptying it of Palestinians altogether and turning it into a playground for the rich, then why should Hamas have any faith in US guarantees to uphold the ceasefire? Or to put it another way, doesn't Donald Trump's Gaza takeover bid simply tear up the whole deal altogether? On the question of the future Palestinians in the Strip, Trump said this last night.
You said that Palestinians would not be guaranteed the right to return to Gaza if the U.S. were to develop it. What did you mean by that?
We've spoken to a lot of Palestinians. They would love to leave Gaza if they could find a place to be. And I've spoken to various leaders of various countries in the not so, distant area from where we're talking about, the Gaza Strip. And I think they were very positive about providing land. What we need is land. And if we could build a nice place for people to live safely, everybody in Gaza would do it. They've been persecuted, they've been spit on, they've been treated like trash, and they would love to get out of Gaza. But until now, they never had an alternative.
Isn't it interesting? When he talks about America, Donald Trump says Americans love their country. They love it. But apparently when it's Palestinians, they don't love it. They can't wait to leave. And equally, Donald Trump doesn't want people migrating into the United States, but he wants Palestinians to go into other countries near Gaza. It's a bit unfair, it's fair to say. The Palestinians have been persecuted, in Donald Trump's own words. He even says they've been spat on. But by who, Donald? Trump said there that other leaders in the region have expressed an interest in taking Gaza's population. No evidence of that whatsoever, because if they have said that, it certainly isn't public. In fact, it's rather to the contrary. And Hamas's pause to the ceasefire may also have been timed to influence those leaders to act to uphold the original ceasefire plan, rather than face the prospect of 1.8 million Palestinian refugees. Jordan's King Abdullah is due to meet Trump at the White House today, and he's highly likely to put up fierce resistance to the president's new plan. Jordan is in a very tricky position. It's a key US ally in the Middle East, as well as an unspoken ally of Israel. It receives more than $1 billion annually in US economic and military aid, which is a hell of a lot given its small population. But the stability of the monarchy has been put under pressure by domestic resistance to those alliances. And that stability has also made Jordan a popular destination for refugees fleeing other Western-backed conflicts in the region. The country already has over 2 million registered Palestinian refugees, although around 1.5 million have Jordanian citizenship. But there are also over 600,000 Palestinian refugees in Jordan who fled Gaza after the Six-Day War of 1967 and who live as second-class citizens. Jordan also took refugees from the British and US-backed Iraq War, as well as the 2011 war in Syria. Wave after wave of refugees prompted the country's king, King Abdullah, to call Jordan, quote, a country at a boiling point in 2016. He's unlikely to want to return his country to that situation. But rather than engage in diplomacy with his country's ally, Trump began the negotiations on TV last night.
Would you withhold aid to these countries if they don't agree to take in the Palestinians?
Yeah, maybe. Sure. Why not? You mean if they don't agree? If they don't agree, I would conceivably withhold aid, yeah.
Now, just to repeat, Jordan has been the most steadfast ally of UK and US interests in the region for the best part of a century. And if that's how Donald Trump is going to treat them, that's how he's going to treat anybody. Something to think about for those British fans of Donald Trump who think, bizarrely, that America first means America and Britain first. No, it means America first. To hell with everybody else if it doesn't suit me. I say America first, really it means Donald Trump first. So how has Israel responded to these developments? In response to Hamas announcing a pause to captive exchanges, Israelis took to the streets to press the Israeli government to uphold the terms of the ceasefire. Gathering near a fire, they set off smoke bombs, chanted slogans, and carried signs with photos of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza. The Israeli government has cancelled all military leave in the army's Gaza division in response to the Hamas statement, but the country's security cabinet has also met to discuss negotiations for the second phase of the ceasefire. Of course, there are still plenty of genocidal hawks in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. One of them, Communications Minister Shlomo Kari, posted this in response to Donald Trump's intervention. When dealing with a Nazi terrorist organization, one must be prepared for such violations. Hamas thinks it can gamble on the lives of our hostages, a grave mistake. No more beats, no more games. The response must be exactly as President Trump has suggested. Completely halt humanitarian aid, cut off electricity, water, and communications, and use brutal and disproportionate force until the abductees return. At the same time, clear Gaza of all uninvolved. The immigration plan must begin immediately. It is time to open the gates of hell on Hamas, and this time without any restrictions on our heroic fighters. The things being listed there are, it's effectively a shopping list of war crimes. We are going to see excessive, inappropriate response, cut off the means of being able to survive, electricity, water, collective punishment, cut off the means to communicate with the external world, open the gates of hell. I mean, this is literally saying, hey, from Shlomo Kahi, hey, let's commit as many war crimes as we can. And these same people, when the ICC says, hey, these are war crimes, or this isn't appropriate, this is illegal, this is criminal, let's issue some arrest warrants, they say, what the hell are you talking about? You're tweeting about war crimes. Kieran, this whole thing is bizarre. I mean, it's hard to really kind of compute politically what's really going on. Is Trump just, is he playing mind games? Is he serious? And look, we know that Trump likes mind games. He does it a lot. In the context of a trade deal, okay, it's not great, but you can live with it. This is in relation to potentially 2 million people being ethnically cleansed. So what do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I think he's deadly serious. Second of all, I think that this, it follows the classic Israeli playbook, which is to say, continually violate, from the Israeli perspective, continually violate the terms of the ceasefire, and then snap back on the basis of some spurious or predetermined reasoning. So, you saw glimmers of it the other day when Trump was saying, I don't know how much longer we can take this. I don't know how much more of this we can take, referring to emaciated hostages. Meanwhile, Israel does whatever it wants. It does whatever it wants in the West Bank. It does whatever it wants in and around Gaza, continues killings on no justification whatsoever, with no attempt at presenting any kind of justification. It arrests bookshop owners in East Jerusalem and offers, reasoning like coloring books were allegedly terrorist tracts, etc., etc. But it is, while it sounds extraordinary, it is pretty typical. This is what Israel does time and time again. Since 2008, Israel has had 5 ceasefire agreements with Hamas prior to this one, 2008, 2012, 2014, 2019, 2021. And in every single instance, if you look into each one of those ceasefires, you will find a similar kind of process of breakdown. But just briefly, Aaron, I mean, the bigger thing in all of this, you referred to it a moment ago, is that all of this is a pretext for the ethnic cleansing and colonization of Gaza. We know that. And, Trump's comments, you referred to it, Aaron, when you talked about the American love of land and home and the expectation that Gazans are going to just up and leave with the first opportunity. I mean, I'll just briefly say, listening to his comments a moment ago that we played, they've spoken to lots of Palestinians who said they would love to leave. It's utter bullshit from the world's foremost bullshit artist. It really is. The Palestinians are not and have never been the rootless cosmopolitans that Donald Trump supporters purport to hate. The inner life, I know it's obvious to all of us, but the inner life of Palestinians is just as rich, just as textured, just as complex as the inner life of an American or a European or anyone else. Their connection to that land is every bit as sacred and powerful and spiritual as the most land-dwelling, property-loving Americans could ever be. Even more so following the death and destruction of the past 18 months. Oscar Wilde said, where there is suffering, there is sacred ground. Well, all of Gaza, all of the West Bank, all of East Jerusalem is sacred ground for precisely the reason of suffering. And I'll end just briefly on a personal example. 5 minutes from my father's house, 5 generations of his family are buried in the ground, in a graveyard 5 minutes from his home. And it's that connection to the earth, to the soil that goes back over generations that means Palestinians will never, ever leave, willingly or by force.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I'm reminded of that line from Patrick Henry in 1775, right at the start of the American War of Independence. Give me liberty or give me death. And that is something that presumably Donald Trump thinks applies to Americans and the American nation. As an American, give me liberty or I will die. And yet for some reason, it doesn't apply to Palestinians. Why not? Presumably because you think they're less human? I don't know. Maybe he should be challenged about it. But what you said there a moment ago, Kieran, about people simply wanting to live near to where their ancestors have been buried, perfectly normal impulse again. And I think even if people were displaced en masse, it wouldn't be the end of it. People talk about this tie between the Jewish people and Israel over the span of thousands of years. And yet they presume that if you moved Palestinians, after 6 months, they would just forget about their land. Again, it's just a complete nonsense, not remotely coherent. Reform are first in a YouGov poll for the second time in 2 weeks. You can see here the data was collected on the 9th and 10th of February. Reform on 26, Labour on 25, the Tories on 21. Lib Dems doing very well on 14, Greens doing very well on 9, SNP on 3 and Plaid Cymru on 1. That is interesting. Reform leading Labour, as I say, for the second time in 2 weeks with YouGov. Serious pollster. But of course, this being Novara Live, we looked into the full data, and I have to say, there is some pretty wild stuff there. One is that the Tories are presently attracting more Labour voters from 2024 than the other way around. 4% of Labour voters in the last general election now plan to vote Tory, or just 2% of Tory voters in 2024 plan to vote Labour. 2%. You're within the margin of error of 0 here, Mr. Starmer. Overall, 14% of Labour's vote in 2024 plans to go to either Reform or the Tories. That's very real, 14%. But interestingly enough, 16% plan to go to the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. It's 18 if you include the SNP. So if Keir Starmer's advisors and Mr. Starmer himself think the mission here is to chase those defecting to Reform, well, they risk making a bad situation a whole lot worse. Then there's the fact that Reform are ahead of Labour in both the North and the Midlands, while Labour are also 4th in the south of England. So they could be back in the situation of piling up votes in cities while struggling elsewhere. Only worse than even 2019. That much vaunted voter efficiency meant plenty of seats went red in July 2024, but they were very much on a knife edge and they could lose most of them. But it gets even worse because, and I can't quite believe I'm saying this, Reform, according to this poll by YouGov, very credible, are ahead of Labour in Scotland. Meanwhile, Plaid Cymru are ahead of Labour in Wales. Yes, really. So Labour are losing ground in Scotland, Wales, and the north of England, basically all their heartlands, as well as struggling in the Midlands and the south. Sounds bad, doesn't it? Well, fortunately, this was all neatly captured by Stats for Lefties on X. Using this YouGov data, they projected 212 for Reform, 177 for Labour, 97 for the Tories. Really important to say, look, Labour are doing terribly, but my goodness, the Tories just recorded their worst result for 2 centuries in July 2024, and they're still going down. As you can see from that graphic, Labour keeps some seats in Wales, although not many. I mean, it's been a one-party state for a century. They also keep some seats in the north of England, and London is pretty red. But they're wiped out in Scotland, the Midlands, and the south. And in the south of Wales, they are actually quite ropey. Reform are picking up lots of seats in the south of Wales there, which is just really remarkable. It's worth saying that if this poll is correct, it would be Labour's worst result since 1910 and the Tories' worst result since 1832. That said, no party would have an overall majority. Kieran, look, it's one poll. Well, it's two polls now, actually, isn't it? With YouGov. We have Find Out now as well. Interestingly enough, if you actually look at the poll of polls, the average of polls, I think over the last 30 days, this now puts Reform in first place. Remarkable. But I think this is particularly interesting because, as I said, you dive into the data, you look at that map there, and actually Labour is staring, frankly, at annihilation in large parts of the UK. Scotland, the North, the Midlands. It still keeps London. It still keeps lots of the Northwest. But it faces the kind of crisis which the Tories were subject to last July. Do you think that's plausible? I know we're 4 years out from that general election, but do you think that's the kind of situation that Keir Starmer and the rest of the Labour Party now confronts?
It's a remarkable poll. It's a remarkable set of polls. So the answer is yes. Yes, it could. I mean, anecdotally, I think all of us feels that if we look around our communities, wherever they may be up and down the country, that it's ostensibly very plausible that Labour is going to lose significant ground at any upcoming election. Obviously a word of caution on this. I know you referred to it, Aaron, but polls are polls. We're very far off any kind of election. Thatcher always said the governing party should be behind in the polls several years before an election, or a year or two before an election. Fortune should start to turn in the final 18 months. Thatcher was wrong about virtually everything, but she was often right about winning elections. So, that does need to be said. But fundamentally, I wouldn't be surprised if we were still in the same position in a year or two in the polls. And I would be fairly surprised, but I wouldn't be astonished if Labour were thumped at the next election by Reform or any other party for that matter. The fundamental problem is that Labour failed to build and sustain an electoral coalition that was anywhere near large enough. They didn't pick winners and losers in the electorate. Instead, it was a much more scattergun set of attacks, to my mind anyway, on middle and working class people. I mean, you see Liz Kendall being wheeled out talking about benefit scroungers. The proportion of money lost
Can I have
to
my
taxpayers,
charger, Stephen?
benefit scroungers is absolutely visible and marginal. And then, middle classes, stamp duty hikes and things like that. Those are things that business rate hikes, etc. Those are things that really hit the small business owning and general middle classes. Instead, Labour prioritised, it seems to me, cozying up to big business and big interests. The problem with that is that big business and billionaires and multimillionaires will always go back to Reform or to the Tories as soon as they don't get exactly what they want from Labour. Reform will always give them what they want, so will the Tories, more or less. So I think that's the primary reason why Labour's vote has just completely, according to these polls, entirely collapsed. Just end by saying, if this were the Victorian era of politics, Keir Starmer might be very, very successful. The Victorian era of politics was built on, expansion abroad for the empire, but generally no tinkering at home. Everything was administrative. You continued trundling along with Her Majesty's government, and you didn't do any big things. You didn't have any huge reforms at home. If that were the kind of world politically that we inhabited in this country still, it's very possible that Keir Starmer would be leading every poll there is. But since the early 20th century and the dawn of modern politics in the early 20th century in this country and beyond, in industrialized countries, that is no longer what we expect of politicians. And so Labour's strategy of doing nothing, building no coalitions, just being the alternative to the other guys, say ad infinitum until we're blue in the face, but it is not working and it hasn't worked for them. And, we could have told them that.
Yeah, the point about the coalition is really key. I think what really stood out for me in the sort of final years of the Tories was how small and medium-sized businesses had just walked away from them. That really came home actually, even in 2017, 2018. I met a ton of small businesses who were like, I've never voted Labour before, but I quite like Jeremy Corbyn. And you're thinking, hold on. Small businesses like the most left-wing Labour leader in history? Really? And that's because they were getting a really bum deal. There's this formulation of Trump winning because, at least rhetorically, he champions local and family capital against national and global capital. When you hear, in the media, people talking about business, pro-business politician, they basically mean a politician who's on the same side as the banks and the big supermarkets. They do not mean the little family businesses on the high street. And I think small businesses really were beginning to grasp that, actually, for much of the last 10 years. These people who say they're pro-business, actually, they keep on enacting policies which just don't help us. And remarkably, Labour have done the exact same thing. Labour, for years, was saying, we're pro-business, get the business people in, get the CEOs in. And then they've just enacted almost straight away with this national insurance employers hike, something which is really going to hurt high street businesses. And this came to mind because I went for something to eat with my wife recently, a local Turkish restaurant, family run. Great people, lovely, lovely people, so community-minded. 4 or 5 members of the same family work there. They pay their staff well, they look after the staff, great people. And got chatting to them, and they said that this December was the worst December they can remember. They had the hardest December, including, during the COVID years, the cost of living crisis. And then you think in April, you've got the national insurance hike. These are really big problems. And they're not being helped by Labour. And these are people who voted for Labour in July. And, historically, that's the part of the country, small and medium-sized businesses, which don't vote Labour. But they did in July. And I think actually Labour's going to lose these people en masse. Many of them will go to Reform. I think many will just go to the Lib Dems, the more progressively minded ones. Some will go to the Greens. And Labour don't seem remotely on top of this. They just look at numbers on a spreadsheet, right? And I find it utterly remarkable. Now, you might be at home thinking, Aaron, well, you've said that the budget was good. And by the way, there were parts of the budget I really support. Labour needed to raise that money. We have this extraordinary financial situation in this country, which is the legacy of 14 years of Conservative government. 100%. I would have found that money through looking at rent seeking in the public sector, ending the outsourcing, taking on certain vested interests. What Keir Starmer did instead was, share pictures on X of him with Larry Fink from BlackRock, right? I'm on the side of BlackRock. Screw you if you've got a high street business. Not smart, and those people are going to come back and I think really hurt Labour in 4 years' time. Sticking with Reform and Labour for a moment, this is a really extraordinary snapshot in domestic politics because over the weekend, Nigel Farage announced that his party had surpassed 200,000 members. He said that in Trowbridge in Wiltshire, where he was speaking to a room of around 500 people. By comparison, the Conservatives claim to have 130,000 members, though Farage himself contests that figure. He says it's below 100,000. I think that's probably true. Meanwhile, Labour's membership is going in the opposite direction. This is an article from Labour List last week. Labour has lost more than 1 in 10 members since the general election, new figures suggest, with the party losing 1 member every 10 minutes on average in recent months. Every 10 minutes. Can you imagine, by the way, if that was happening under Jeremy Corbyn? My goodness, the aneurysms that James O'Brien would be performing on LBC. I don't even want to think about it. The party's paid-up members currently number around 309,000, down 11.4% from around 348,500 in July last year, according to members of the party's governing bodies. That's the NEC. They're privy to those numbers. The most recent figures suggest membership fell by more than 9,500 between the end of November and the end of January, a rate of around 1 departure every 10 minutes or 152 a day. So while Reform climbs above 200,000 members, Labour are losing a member every 10 minutes. Elsewhere, members of the party's NEC, who gave those numbers to Labour List, also report that the party's youth membership has fallen to 30,000 when it was 100,000 5 years ago. All of which means we now face the very real prospect that Reform this year, and again, I can't believe I'm saying this, becomes the largest party by membership in the UK. So Reform are now polling ahead of Labour in Scotland and in the next several months, probably before the summer, could overtake them by members. More donors than the Tories, more millionaire backers than the Tories, and more members than Labour. And it's not even a real party. You can't shape policy on anything. It's a business owned by Nigel Farage. And it could be about to become the largest party by membership in the UK. If that doesn't tell you something about the crisis of legitimacy and democratic politics in this country, I don't know what will. Kieran, I know you probably agree that this is a really extraordinary set of data. If Reform overtake Labour, let's say in 3 months from now, I think that's basically at the present rate, we're looking at about 3 to 4 months, Reform will overtake Labour in terms of members. Do you think that'll be a wake-up call? Do you think there'll be a moment where actually the national press, including the Liberal press, which supports Labour, will say, this is serious, something really serious is going on? Because, polls come and go. But when you have hundreds of thousands of people joining a new political party, and by the way, that does not happen very often, this is the largest any party outside the major two has ever been. Surely that is going to stir something, even amongst the most hardcore Starmerites.
Yeah, I mean, look, it could signal a 1929 moment, right? What does that mean? It means it's the moment when Labour first won power in this country, breaking the two-party monopoly, I should say duopoly, Liberals and Tories. It could mean that. And, if it does, if that's the outcome, then I suspect that my suspicion is that Reform wouldn't last particularly long in government, although it wouldn't win a second election. But I obviously have no way of knowing that. I think it's a sort of itch that needs to be scratched by a lot of the electorate, and in power, it wouldn't be able to do that many things that differently. That's not to say it shouldn't be taken seriously. On the party membership point specifically, in the early days of the Starmerite regime, they deliberately tried to drive down party membership, of course, right? As one staffer affectionately or fetchingly referred to it, shaking off the fleas, I think was the term, to get rid of the residual left in the party membership left over from the Corbyn era. I think what's remarkable about the data that you're referring to, Aaron, is that this is latter day. So one would assume that all the fleas have been shaken off from Starmer's point of view. And that where we are now is that he is losing Starmerites, or people maybe who are certainly willing to lend their time, energy, vote, etc., money, because of course it costs to be a member of the Labour Party, to the Starmerite project up until now. So that's obviously going to signal something more alarming for people around Starmer who care about, retaining power. I think will it signal, to your specific question, will it signal a serious break in the political class? I think some elements of the political class are waking up to the fact that Starmerism hasn't been a resounding success. That doesn't mean that they're now, cloying for some left alternative. My fear is that, and people like to say this about the governing party or the people in power, but I really, really think it's true in this case. My fear is that Keir Starmer is so inept, or in any case, the people around him are so inept, he has so little handle on power that there will be no practical way, as much as anything else, that he could turn the ship around at this point. That's my suspicion. So I think, as much as I think they live in their own echo chambers of yes men and whatever else, he is probably quite aware of the fact that he, according to these polls, according to party membership, the ascendant threat of Reform, etc., is not doing very well at all. But then it's a question of, well, how on earth do we reverse that? How on earth do we change that? And I think for all sorts of ideological, paradigmatic thinking, etc., reasons, as much as inefficiency, incapability, etc., they are in a place where they cannot turn the ship around, regardless of what the polls are telling them, regardless of what party members are telling them.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And also there's the economic situation, right? Final quarter of 2024, we saw 0.1% contraction of the economy. Of course, if you see another quarterly contraction, that's a recession. At the moment, the Bank of England is not suggesting that will happen. What they are suggesting is that growth for this year has now been halved. They were predicting up until last week 1.5% growth for 2025. They're now saying 0.75%, which is why you got that interest rate cut, because there is a genuine concern we go into recession this year. And you even had somebody who's an external member of the relevant board with regards to setting interest rates at the Bank of England, the Monetary Policy Committee, This chap gave a speech, I think, in mid-January, saying that we should expect 5 or 6 rate cuts this year. The subtext is because we need to avoid a recession, right? And if there is a recession this year, and this is crazy, that will be Britain's 3rd recession in 5 years. So we keep on having recessions and then there's no real recovery. And then you have the media class going, why are reforms so popular? This is kind of what happens, right? When you have the 2 mainstream political parties not doing very much and things just keep on getting worse, people will just try something new. It's not even ideological, actually, in many cases. Reform are the new thing. They're the new thing. Gary Stevenson said that to me, and I couldn't agree more. They're the new thing because the old thing has completely failed. Finally, on this story, Sacha Lord, who was the nightlife czar in Manchester, very close to Andy Burnham, he's kind of given up on Labour. He said that there's going to be changes to the business rates with regards to pubs, I think after April, which means up to 9,000 pubs will close. Labour don't seem to care. Because again, like I say, for somebody like Rachel Reeves or Pat McFadden, it's just a number on a spreadsheet, right? And you get the same answer you heard from that member of cabinet a few weeks ago now. We talked about it on the show. She was being presented with these facts by a journalist at Sky. I think it was Kay Burley. And she said, well, actually, CEOs say Britain's a great place to invest. So don't worry about the 9,000 pubs closing. Don't worry about that family restaurant I spoke about a moment ago, saying we've had the worst December since we opened, worse than the cost of living crisis, worse than the pandemic. Don't worry about those people. CEOs, vague CEOs, say they want to invest in the UK, so everything's fine. Everything's not fine. That's why Reform are polling so well. That's why they're gaining members. It's like ostriches, burying their heads in the sand. I think at some point they'll be woken up. I mean, at what point is it going to be too late? Over the weekend, the news broke that Labour's Andrew Gwynn, MP for Gorton and Denton, and Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Public Health and Prevention, was in a WhatsApp group called Trigger Me Timbers. So far, so innocuous. But the problem for Gwynn is that this group included sexist and anti-Semitic comments, not to mention Gwynn himself slagging off his own constituents. In writing up the story, the Financial Times predictably called him a Corbynista. Of course they did. Anybody who's done something bad must be left-wing. The truth is, of course, that Gwynn backed Owen Smith in 2016, Keir Starmer in 2020, and is a member of Labour Friends of Israel. Corbynista, indeed. This story was broken by the Mail on Sunday, and there was one passage which really stood out. In one particularly shocking comment, the Gorton and Denton MP says he hopes a 70-year-old woman will soon be dead after she dared to ask about her bins. The Stockport resident wrote to her local councillor saying she hadn't voted Labour, but added, as you have been re-elected, I thought it would be an appropriate time to contact you with regard to the bin collections. After the councillor shared the letter among fellow Labour figures in the WhatsApp group, Mr Gwynn, who is Labour MP, wrote a suggested response. Dear resident, fuck your bins. I'm re-elected and without your vote. Screw you. PS. Hopefully you'll have croaked it by the all-outs. That's the all-out local elections. There is much more of this, however. There is a write-up in The Guardian which captures just some of the worst of it. The Guardian has seen more than 1,000 pages of WhatsApp messages spanning 2019 to 2022, in which the sacked minister, this is Gwynn, joked about the death of an elderly voter and a cycling campaigner, who he hoped would be, quote, mown down by a lorry. Oh, it's just ridiculous. You're an MP, for God's sake. He also said someone sounds too Jewish and too militaristic, apparently from their name alone. In newly disclosed messages, Gwynn described a constituent as a, quote, illiterate retard, and a fellow councillor as a fat, middle-aged, useless thicket. He called neighbouring MP Navendu Mishra a splitter for forming a group of left-wing Labour MPs in 2022. But remember, according to the Financial Times, this guy's a Corbynista. Fake news. The group, named Trigger Me Timbers, was set up by Gwynn's office caseworker, Claire Reid, in January 2019. At its height, it had 44 members, and most of whom were local councillors and activists. The forum was initially set up to discuss routine party business, such as local events and campaign literature, but it soon turned nasty, according to one Labour figure. The group's was reserved for left-wing Labour activists, whom they refer to more than 100 times as trots. When Christian Wakeford defected from the Conservatives to Labour in January 2022. Ryan, and then a local councillor. This is somebody we're going to talk about more in a moment. They're now an MP. Jokes about, quote, all the trots exploding on socials. Gwyn said the, quote, nutty wing of a local party is going bonkers that we've let a Tory have the Labour whip and not Jezza, a reference to Jeremy Corbyn, who was suspended by the party. But remember, Andrew Gwyn, according to the Financial Times, is a Corbynista. Fake news, Financial Times. Reid, now a senior official on Labour's National Policy Forum, this is one of the councillors in this group, said of the party's left-wing membership, aside from anything else today, it's very good for the internal party. Hopefully they'll all leave, to which Gwyn replied, yep. Hopefully they'll all leave. By the way, they are all leaving. Previous story, newsflash, somebody's leaving every 10 minutes. Is this all part of the plan, Andrew Gwyn? Reform. 200,000 members. They're going to overtake Labour in 2025. They're polling higher than Labour in YouGov. Labour are being smashed in Scotland and Wales and the North and the Midlands. They're losing the members. Is this all part of the big plan, Andrew Gwyn? This is how we change the country, by being completely demolished as a political entity. I don't think so somehow. Anyway, yesterday, a second MP, Oliver Ryan, who was in those screenshots a moment ago, he was at that time a councillor, was suspended alongside Gwyn for also being in that WhatsApp group. Now, Ryan is today the MP for Burnley. I looked at his CV before tonight's show, and he's not really done anything. Really. He was a councillor, a bit like Andrew Gwyn, by the way. He's been a councillor since he was 21. Not really done anything else. So how come he's an MP? And then it hit me. The guy referred to colleagues and Labour Party members dozens of times as trots in a private WhatsApp group. I think it was close to 100, right, that they were calling other people trots. In Keir Starmer's Labour Party, that's the only qualification you need to become an MP. Now remember, we had Faiza Shaheen, who apparently wasn't a suitable candidate for the Labour Party at the last general election. She had a PhD, I think, LSE academic, Oxford, author, head of a think tank, from a working class background, dad was a taxi driver, new mum, had it all, but apparently she wasn't suitable. Sorry, we can't have people like you as MPs. But apparently Oliver Ryan, who's never done anything, from what I can see, he's perfect. He's a perfect MP in the making. Why? Because he seems to hate anyone remotely left-wing. That's all you need to be an MP in Keir Starmer's party. And by the way, and this is terrifying, there are literally hundreds of Labour MPs like this. They have literally been promoted on the basis that they don't like left-wing people or left-wing policies. That's why they're in Parliament. We only get 650 of these people, and we're not sending our best. By the way, that applies to many, many more councillors too. No wonder the country is screwed. Here, go administer a local authority. Go represent tens of thousands of constituents in the House of Commons. All you need to do is slag people off and say they're trots. Kieran, am I being unfair? What are the credentials to become an MP in Keir Starmer's Labour Party?
No, you're not being unfair at all. I mean, as to the comments themselves, before I come on to your question, what do you even say? It's just so cringeworthy and embarrassing listening to these pathetic individuals saying what they said. It's just really, really painful, embarrassing stuff. I think the problem with people like Gwyn is that they like to impress their friends more than they like to leave a meaningful political legacy, certainly more than they care about improving the lives of ordinary people. They just like the sort of fast-paced stimulant hit of making people laugh regardless of how it's done. Not the kind of people you want in public life, being paid by the taxpayer to serve their communities. And then that sort of segues to what you were asking, which is, are you being unfair? No, I mean, I don't want to betray any confidences, but I knew time in my life a few years ago, knew some of the people, had the great displeasure of knowing some of the people who got into Parliament subsequently got into Parliament as Starmer's new intake. And, some of them were more capable than others, obviously. That's just a, obvious thing. Nonetheless, there were many, many, many who were handpicked on the sole basis that they would be loyal to Keir Starmer. That's kind of unsurprising, right? But they had very little other qualification in most cases. Hearing all those references to trots, Aaron, made me feel like I was maybe almost nostalgic for 2019. No, it didn't. It was a horrible time. And, again, it's just factional. It's factional dogfighting, and that's all it comes down to, unfortunately. And it's incredibly depressing that this stuff passes for electoral representative politics in 2025 in this country. I just say one final thing. Obviously at this point, saying that Keir Starmer is venal and unprincipled is like saying Bruce Lee was a film star principally known for his martial arts films. But, the Labour leaks and the Labour files uncovered just as bad as this, or worse in many instances. And that didn't stop Starmer smothering the Ford report because it was politically expedient to him to do so. So, just final thought on that.
Yeah. There is somebody in the comments saying, what's a trot? A trot means a Trotskyist. I mean, that's, again, most regular people, and I understand that not everybody watching this show or listening to this show, you're probably quite political, aren't you? Most regular people have no idea what a trot is. And yet you have this absolute moron, Mr. Ryan, becoming an MP, obsessed with trots. How about you become obsessed with clean high streets, decent housing, good wages, smart industrial policy? We need MPs who care about that stuff rather than little factional beefs with people, calling them trots as if you're still in the student union. You aren't. You're running the country. I think, as I get older, we've got first past the post in this country without primaries. In the US, they have primaries, of course. In this country, there was an argument made for open selection, mandatory selection, very similar to open primaries in the US. But of course, that's Stalinism, according to our institutionally stupid media. I do feel like first past the post without primaries is the worst possible system in terms of promoting talented politicians and policymakers. It's like a lab-engineered system to promote and elevate the most talentless, most insipid, most ineffective people possible. World leaders have been meeting in Paris for perhaps one of the most important summits for the future of humanity. No, it's not a climate summit, though it matters just as much. Rather, it's about AI, artificial intelligence, and how its development should be regulated. That's been pitched both as a question of safety as well as one of political and international cooperation. However, one country wasn't playing ball. This was US Vice President J.D. Vance.
The United States of America is the leader in AI, and our administration plans to keep it that way. The U.S. possesses all components across the full AI stack, including advanced semiconductor design, frontier algorithms, and of course, transformational applications. Now, the computing power this stack requires is integral to advancing AI technology. And to safeguard America's advantage, the Trump administration will ensure that the most powerful AI systems are built in the U.S. with American-designed and manufactured chips. And let me be emphatic about this point. America wants to partner with all of you. And we want to embark on the AI revolution before us with a spirit of openness and collaboration. But to create that kind of trust, we need international regulatory regimes that fosters the creation of AI technology rather than strangles it. And we need our European friends in particular to look to this new frontier with optimism rather than trepidation. We believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off, and we'll make every effort to encourage pro-growth AI policies. And I like to see that deregulatory flavor making its way into a lot of the conversations this conference.
So, and that's a vision of a lightly regulated AI arms race with the US as the winner. We're going to collaborate just as long as we're on top, sweeping up massive profits as well as its firms increasingly employing artificial intelligence in a range of sectors rather than human workers. That vision put the US at odds, at least on paper, with many of the other powers attending the summit. Over 70 countries, including China, Germany, and India, have signed up to a declaration ensuring that, quote, AI is open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, secure, and trustworthy, taking into account international frameworks for all. Seems quite sensible, right? Now, The declaration is non-binding, but it's intended to be a broadly agreed international framework for AI development. But the Americans rejected it, as did our own British government. So why did the UK refuse to sign the declaration, one which China and India and Germany were on board with? Well, we don't know, with Keir Starmer's spokesperson refusing to comment on the government's reasons for rejecting it. They're only a democratically elected government after all. Why should they let us know why they're doing what they're doing? But one MP told The Guardian this: "I think we have little strategic room but to be downstream of the US. In other words, to act in Britain's interests is to act, once again, in America's interests." Now, Vance's speech came just a couple of weeks after Chinese AI company DeepSeek sent shockwaves through the US tech economy. Released to the world, DeepSeek's open source model means anyone can open it up and see how it works, potentially damaging the market for US technology firms like OpenAI and Anthropic. Their business depends on selling, remember, proprietary models. And the Chinese creators of DeepSeek also claim to have created what they've made at a fraction of the cost of those US models like OpenAI before giving it away for free. That threat to the American dominance of AI by China hasn't gone down well, with Vance saying this at the summit.
Now, we've also watched as hostile foreign adversaries have weaponized AI software to rewrite history, surveil users, and censor speech. This is hardly new, of course. As they do with other tech, some authoritarian regimes have stolen and used AI to strengthen their military, intelligence, and surveillance capabilities, capture foreign data, and create propaganda to undermine other nations' national security. I want to be clear. This administration will block such efforts, full stop. We will safeguard American AI and chip technologies from theft and misuse, work with our allies and partners to strengthen and extend these protections, and close pathways to adversaries attaining AI capabilities that threaten all of our people.
By the way, America doesn't make any chips, okay? It makes very few chips. Intel is one of the microprocessor companies, integrated circuit companies it has. They don't make many chips. Most chips, as I've said before, are made by Samsung of South Korea and TSMC in Taiwan. The Chinese also have a company, SMIC. The US does have some firms which design the chips, but those are manufactured elsewhere. So this idea that it's all American companies, American know-how, simply not true. Simply not true. Kieran, it was really remarkable actually watching that event today, because it was the first time, we've had these conversations in abstract, but it was the first time where you're confronted with really overt American imperialism and an American politician, the vice president, looking at the Europeans, the Arabs, and saying, you know what, we're all in it together, but we're really first among equals. They're saying the bit out loud you're not meant to say when you're the imperial overlord.
I mean, that's an important point to start with, right? Is that actually, we could overdo how much of a rupture this is. It's obviously, it's explicit, but trade conventions and trade deals and so on, since about 1944, have always been in America's favor, more or less. They've always, wherever there's an interest for America, they've always ensured that they secure favorable trade terms or terms of trade for their own country. So in that sense, this isn't, a huge break with the past. I think, two things. I mean, first of all, Aaron, you know a lot more about AI than I do, so I'd be interested to hear what you think's going on. But a couple of thoughts. First of all, it could just be performative unilateralism from an incoming administration that wants to show its base and to an extent the world how much it's willing to break with multilateralism, multilateral agreements, intergovernmentalism, internationalism, etc., etc. So it could be the reason that they're saying the quiet part out loud, as you aptly put it, is because it's performative and they're showing performatively how unilateral they can be, along with dunking on the ICC, the UN, etc., etc. So it's part of that. The other, but I think, even if that is part of the story, I think more likely or more instrumentally, it's a fairly simple explanation, but I think it holds water, is that this is to quite a significant extent a US administration in the pocket of big tech, a pocket of big tech, but also in hock to it in terms of the personalities around the president. We all know who I'm talking about, first and foremost, but others as well. And I think, in the 1920s, the Republican Party was powered by Wall Street. And as a result, it didn't regulate banking, which caused the greatest financial cataclysm the capitalist system has ever known, the Wall Street crash. In the 2020s, it seems to me the Republican Party is powered primarily at this moment in time by tech barons. And so it makes sense to me that it is resistant effectively to AI regulation, with probably a lashing of just classic free market fundamentalism thrown in as well. The UK, you've already covered it. It's not even worth mentioning. We just do whatever the Americans do.
After buying Twitter in 2023, Elon Musk renamed the platform X and very efficiently turned it into a tool for amplifying and normalizing his own political views. During the 2024 presidential election, both Musk and X were accused of being at the epicenter of pro-Trump misinformation. What's not in doubt is that Musk's $44 billion investment in Twitter has paid off massively. He now exercises enormous power in Donald Trump's administration, overseeing the remaking and radical reduction of federal government. He also made a personal fortune, with his wealth growing by $170 billion in the month following Trump's election. With that kind of payoff on Twitter, it appears that Musk is now thinking bigger. And what's bigger than AI, the technology that will shape all of our collective futures? Musk now appears to have gone for it, leading a group of backers who've made a $97 billion bid for control of OpenAI. Now, the story is a little more complicated than that. OpenAI is presently comprised of two distinct entities. The first is profit-making. It's a profit-making firm. But that's not the part that Musk has gone for. Instead, he's pitching for the non-profit company that manages the profit-making part. Responding to Musk's offer, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman posted this: "No thank you, but we will buy Twitter, not X, for $9.74 billion if you want." $9.74 billion is just 10% of what Musk offered for OpenAI and a fraction of the $44 billion he paid for X. In response, Musk said this: "Swindler." So what's that a reference to? Who knows? But we do know that Musk has a competitor AI model called XAI, which he's pitched as a rival to OpenAI. Speaking at the Paris AI Summit, Sam Altman gave this diagnosis of Musk's OpenAI bid.
Do you think Musk's approach then is from a position of insecurity about XAI?
Probably his whole life is from a position of insecurity. I feel for the guy.
You feel for him?
I do, actually. I don't think he's like a happy person. I do feel for him.
Kieran, it's a brave person to publicly psychologize Elon Musk, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a brave person, but I think clearly, I mean, I can't read this in any way other than as an inter-tech bro beef. Maybe, Aaron, you're going to tell me that it's far more significant than that, and I will defer to you. But it just seems to be like, boys sort of competing about their toys, basically. Is it more significant than that? Can I put the question back to you?
No, I don't think so. Although with Musk, often there is a deeper game being played, right? I mean, he bought Twitter, and everybody's like, "Why is he buying Twitter? That's so stupid." Actually, it wasn't. It made him a terrific amount of money. No, I think in this instance you're right. By the way, embodied by the fact we showed a screen grab a moment ago. Elon Musk has changed his name on his name on X to Hairy Balls. The guy's 51. You're in your 50s. I don't think I found that funny at 15. Kieran, do you think it's appropriate for somebody in their 50s to be calling themselves Hairy Balls in public?
I mean, no, and I think, but I think that's the least of his misdemeanors, to be honest. But I think he, again, seems to be a theme tonight. I don't want to always fall back on cringe, but what Andrew, we were referring to Andrew Quinn's comments earlier is very cringe. Obviously, they're offensive, but my overriding emotion, and again with Elon Musk, almost every time he opens his mouth is, rather than offense, is deep, almost musculoskeletal kind of cringe reaction.
Great show tonight. Kieran, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Thank you. I've really enjoyed our discussion.
Very, very wide-ranging. Of course, the person to blame for that is Stephen Methan, our researcher here at Novara Media. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in as well. Come back tomorrow for another live show at 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.